small blue teddy bear and was stopped at the door. Only immediate family is allowed today, the security guard explained politely. I smiled and said, "That's fine. Please give this bear to the baby from his grandmother." What no one realized was that I wasn't just any visitor. This was my hospital, a legacy from my late husband worth $8 million. Main story. I stood in the bright hallway of Mercy General, heart pounding with excitement for my first grandchild. The guard checked his list twice. "Leona Martinez isn't on the approved visitors list," he said, sounding almost sorry. Inside, my daughter-in-law, Kaya, had given strict instructions. No exceptions. I waited as he phoned the maternity ward. "Yes, Mrs. Martinez is here," he said into the receiver. A pause, then a quiet nod. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Only the names on the list are allowed today." The words hit like a cold wave. This wasn't a mistake. Kaya hadn't forgotten me. She had purposely left me out. I placed the teddy bear gently on the reception desk. "Please make sure my grandson gets this," I said, keeping my voice calm. The guard nodded, clearly uneasy. As I walked to the elevator, I kept my back straight, though my chest burned with humiliation. For 37 years, I'd walked these corridors as the owner, greeting staff who knew me by name. Today, I was just another visitor being turned away. Downstairs, familiar faces greeted me, doctors, nurses, administrators, each offering warm smiles and respectful nods. They all knew I could override Kaya's restriction with one phone call. But what would that prove? Forcing my way in would only create conflict on the day my grandson entered the world. Back in my car, the tears came. I thought of my late husband, Charles, of raising our son Darren alone, of every time I'd swallowed my opinions to keep the peace. My phone buzzed, a text from Darren. "Baby's here. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. We named him James after Kaya's father. No invitation, no mention of me." I looked at the hospital building, the one carrying my family name, employing thousands. Power meant nothing if it cost me my dignity. But Kaya was about to learn that excluding me came with consequences. I started the car, already planning my next steps. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a lesson in respect. I kept telling myself it was normal. Young couples need their own space. But that day at the hospital proved it wasn't about space at all. It was about control, and Kaya had just shown her hand. My phone lit up with Darren's name. "Mom, I heard there was some confusion at the hospital today," he said. "Confusion?" That's what he called it. "No confusion, sweetheart," I answered evenly. "Just a little mix-up with visiting hours. How are you and the baby?" "We're great. James is perfect." Kaya's a bit tired, but everything went smoothly. Then came the pause. "Maybe we could arrange a visit next week once we're settled at home." Next week, after everyone else on Kaya's approved list had already met my grandson. "Of course," I said, whatever works best for your family. "Thanks for understanding, Mom. You know how it is. New baby, germs, stress. Germs and stress. As if I were some kind of risk." "I understand completely," I said, and I did. Better than he realized. After hanging up, I poured a glass of wine and let the day replay in my mind. Tomorrow, I would start making changes, subtle ones, the kind that go unnoticed until they can't be undone. Kaya thought she'd set the rules. She'd underestimated me. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The humiliation at the hospital had stripped away my last excuses. It was time to see the pattern for what it was. It began small. During the wedding planning, Kaya gently trimmed the guest list. "Maybe we should keep it to people really close to Darren and me," she'd suggested. One by one, friends who'd known Darren since birth were crossed off. When I asked to keep my oldest friend Margaret on the list, Kaya sighed. "Of course. If having your friends there is more important than keeping our wedding intimate." I backed down, eager to avoid being labeled the difficult mother-in-law. The honeymoon stretched from 2 weeks to nearly a month. Family dinners and business meetings slipped away while they toured Europe. Darren returned different, guarded, distant, always checking with Kaya before making even the simplest plan. Christmas traditions followed. Our sacred morning of cinnamon rolls and gift opening became Christmas Eve instead, a consolation night. When I asked for a family photo, Kaya demurred. Not really photogenic right now, though she looked flawless. Sunday calls dwindled. When I phoned, Kaya often answered. "Oh, hi, Leona. Darren's busy, at the gym, in the shower, out with friends. I'll tell him you called." Return calls came late, hurried, distracted. I'd convinced myself it was the natural rhythm of married life. But standing in that hospital corridor, turned away from my own grandson, I finally saw the truth. What would you do in my place? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. I started noticing the gaps without meaning to. 3 weeks between calls, then a month, then 6 weeks. Every time I reached out, it felt like I was being labeled demanding, as if wanting to hear my son's voice made me clingy or unable to respect their space. The breaking point should have been Thanksgiving. For decades, it had been a big celebration. Colleagues from the hospital, neighbors, anyone who needed a place to belong. After Charles died, hosting became my way of honoring him. But Darren called with a careful tone. "Mom, Kaya's been feeling overwhelmed. The doctor says she needs to avoid stress. Maybe we should keep it small. Just the 3 of us." I agreed immediately, worried about her health. Yet when the day arrived, they canceled at the last moment. "Kaya's not feeling up to it," Darren said. I spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time in 30 years, until I saw Kaya's social media that evening. A beautifully set table, her family around her, laughter and candlelight. She wasn't too sick to celebrate. She was too sick to celebrate with me. I kept making excuses. Maybe she just felt more comfortable with her own family. Maybe I was imagining things. But the pattern became undeniable. Birthdays reduced to brief calls. Mother's Day turned into a text. Whenever I tried to see Darren alone, lunch, tennis, anything, he'd hesitate. "I should check with Kaya," he'd say. Or, "Why don't we make it dinner for 3? 3 years of this. 3 years of watching my world shrink while I told myself I was being understanding and supportive. 3 years of my son slowly disappearing behind a wall his wife built. At hospital auxiliary meetings, other women complained about their daughters-in-law. I used to feel superior, proud that I wasn't the meddling mother-in-law who couldn't let go. Now I understood. It wasn't about letting go. It was about being quietly erased. Yesterday at the hospital made it unmistakable. I wasn't family anymore. I was an outsider to be managed and excluded. I finished my coffee and looked at the photo on my desk from Darren's college graduation. The 3 of us, me, Charles, and Darren, beaming with pride. After Charles died, Darren and I leaned on each other through the grief. But staring at that picture now, I realized something else. Charles would never have allowed this slow removal. He would have recognized the manipulation from the start. I'd been so afraid of being called a difficult mother-in-law that I let my son be pulled away piece by piece. But I was still here. I was still his mother, still the woman who built an empire in this town and raised a good man. Kaya thought she'd won, that she controlled every boundary. She was about to find out how wrong she was. I opened my laptop and began a list. People I hadn't spoken to in months, connections that could quietly shift the balance. The first call was to Margaret Thornton, my oldest friend and former head of HR at the hospital. "Leona, darling," Margaret said warmly when she answered. "I was just thinking of you. How are you holding up? I heard about the baby. That's actually why I'm calling. I need a favor. Anything. You know that. I need to know more about Kaya, her background, her family, her work history." Discreetly. There was a pause. Margaret understood immediately. "What kind of concerns?" "The kind that might affect my grandson's future," I said quietly. "I'll make some calls," she replied without hesitation. "Give me 48 hours. Next I rang Dr. Patricia Reeves, my longtime physician. Patricia has never sugar-coated a word in her life. "I need to ask you something confidential," I said. "What do you know about Kaya Martinez, your daughter-in-law?" "Not much professionally. She's not my patient." "Why?" "She's been claiming health issues, saying she needs to avoid stress, canceling family events, and yesterday she used it to keep me from meeting my grandson." Patricia was quiet for a beat. "Leona, you know I can't share private medical details, but I can tell you this. I've heard nothing in the medical community about any serious condition. And you know how fast news travels among doctors in this town. That was all I needed. If Kaya truly had health problems that required strict stress avoidance, Patricia would have heard something. She hadn't. I called my third contact, James Morrison, a private investigator I'd trusted for years with delicate business matters. He was expensive, but he was thorough and completely discreet. Mrs. Martinez, it's been a while. How can I help you? He said. I need a full background check, I replied. Financial records, employment history, social media analysis, everything you can find legally. Who's the subject? My daughter-in-law. James didn't ask why. He'd worked with too many wealthy families to be surprised by quiet domestic battles. I'll need her full name, date of birth, anything you have. I gave him what little I knew. Kaya had always been vague about her past, and I'd been too polite to press for details, another mistake I now regretted. How deep do you want me to go? As deep as necessary. I want to know who she really is. While I waited for his report, I started digging myself. Social media had never interested me, but now it felt essential. Kaya's Instagram was a glossy feed of designer outfits, fine dining, and exotic vacations. Yet as I scrolled back, a pattern emerged. Before she met Darren, the pictures were sparse and ordinary. Tiny apartment shots, budget restaurants, complaints about long shifts. After their relationship began, the posts turned into a catalog of luxury. Another detail hit me harder. In 3 years of posts, I appeared exactly 0 times. Even at events I'd attended, the angles were cropped to keep me out. At their engagement party, where I'd given a toast, she posted dozens of pictures. According to her version of that night, I might as well have been invisible. Margaret called back less than a day later, faster than promised. Leona, we need to meet in person, she said. We met at the country club where we'd shared countless lunches over the years. She was waiting in a private room, a slim folder on the table. Her maiden name is Ka Rodriguez, Margaret began. She worked as a sales associate at Nordstrom for 2 years, Macy's for 8 months before that, and a string of short-term retail jobs earlier. No degree. She claims on social media to have a marketing diploma from State University. But a friend in the alumni office found no record of her graduating in any field. My stomach tightened. What about her family? Her parents live in a modest apartment across town. Her father picks up construction work when he can. Her mother cleans houses. Nice people, but nothing like the background she's implied to Darren. Margaret's expression grew more serious. I spoke to 3 of her former employers. All mentioned a pattern. She formed close relationships with wealthy older customers. There was an incident at Nordstrom. An older client complained Kaya had somehow accessed her personal information to cultivate a friendship. Management had to intervene. Officially, she resigned, but it sounded like they were pushing her out. I thought of all the times Kaya admired my jewelry, asked about the hospital, casually steered conversations toward inheritance and estate planning. I believed she was trying to bond. Now I wondered if she'd been collecting data. There's more, Margaret continued. Her name came up in a social services circle connected to an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen died about 6 months before Kaya met Darren. She had no family and reportedly grew close to a young helper who convinced her to change her will, away from charity to the helper herself. Was that helper Kaya? The name on the paperwork was different, but the description and time match. Mrs. Chen's estate was worth around $40,000. Not a fortune, but enough to upgrade an apartment, buy a new wardrobe, and create the image of someone from a wealthier world. I felt a chill settle in my chest. Keep this between us, I told Margaret. Of course, she said, but be careful, Leona. If what we suspect is true, Kaya isn't just ambitious. She's deliberate. I drove home with my mind racing, every memory of Kaya replaying in a new and unsettling light. Everything was starting to fit together, and the pattern was unmistakable. Kaya hadn't simply fallen for my son, she had selected him. She'd studied our family, understood the wealth we carried, and positioned herself perfectly to win Darren's heart and, eventually, his inheritance. The effort to isolate me wasn't emotional, it was calculated. I was the one obstacle between her and total control of my son's life and finances. That evening, James Morrison, the investigator, called with his first findings. Mrs. Martinez, your daughter-in-law has been busy since the wedding, he said. What kind of busy? She's been meeting with several estate planning attorneys, different firms, asking about spousal inheritance rights, contesting wills, even what qualifies as elder abuse in inheritance disputes. My blood ran cold. Elder abuse. power of attorney, challenging a parent's competency. She was researching how to gain control while I was still alive. James, I need every detail documented, every meeting, every question, I told him. Already on it? And Mrs. Martinez, are you in any physical danger? I don't think so, I answered after a pause. But my independence might be. Then be careful who you trust, he warned. If she's as strategic as she seems, exposure won't sit well. After we hung up, I sat in my study, surrounded by family photographs. 3 generations of Martinezes built on love and loyalty. Kaya had slipped into that legacy with surgical precision, exploiting my desire to be a supportive mother-in-law, Darren's need to please his wife, and our family's habit of avoiding conflict. But she'd misjudged me. Old doesn't mean weak. Confronting her directly would only push Darren further away and give her the chance to brand me as the unstable mother-in-law she'd been setting up in everyone's mind. I needed a quieter plan, one that let her own actions reveal who she really was. My first step was to protect the family's future. I called my attorney, Robert Chambers, a man who'd handled my legal affairs for 15 years. Robert, I need to make changes to my estate planning immediately. What kind of changes, Leona? I want a trust for my grandson with strict conditions, and I need to restructure Darren's inheritance. The assets must stay shielded from spouses or creditors. We spent 3 hours refining the details. James's education and health needs would be fully funded, but the principal would remain under an independent trustee until he turned 30. Darren would receive income, but never direct access to the core assets. Robert, seasoned by decades of watching families implode, asked no unnecessary questions. My second step was to rebuild a bridge to Darren without setting off Kaya's alarms. I began sending thoughtful gifts for the baby. A hand-knitted blanket made by the same woman who'd crafted Darren's baby clothes, a silver rattle that had belonged to my grandfather, pieces of family history impossible to dismiss. Each package included a short note filled with love and pride, never a hint of guilt or accusation. The approach worked. A week later, Darren called. Mom, thanks for the baby gifts. They're really thoughtful. I'm just happy to add a little to his life, I replied, careful to keep my tone warm but neutral. How are you adjusting to fatherhood? It's incredible, he said, his voice softening. Exhausting, but incredible. He's got these tiny hands, and when he grips your finger, for a moment he sounded like my son again, not simply Kaya's husband. We talked for 20 minutes about sleepless nights and the way babies seem to change overnight. Only near the end did he mention her. Kaya's having a harder time adjusting, he admitted. She's anxious about everything. The pediatrician says it's normal, but she's constantly worried something will happen to James. It was the longest, most natural conversation we'd had in months, and it confirmed what I already knew. My quiet countermove had begun. I listened carefully as Darren described Kaya's constant worries about the baby. That's very common for first-time mothers, I said gently. Is she getting any support? Sometimes it helps to talk with other new moms. She doesn't really want to join any of those groups, he replied. She says they make her feel judged. Interesting. Kaya was cutting herself off from other mothers, the same way she'd separated Darren from me. Well, if she ever wants to talk to someone who's been through it, I'm here, I offered. No judgment, just experience. I'll mention that to her, Darren said, his voice quiet. My next move was to place allies where Kaya couldn't easily interfere. I started with Tom Bradley, Darren's best friend from college and his best man. Mrs. Martinez, it's great to hear from you, Tom said when I called. How are you? I'm well, Tom. I'd love to catch up. I feel like I haven't seen enough of Darren's friends since he got married. Yeah, that's been different, he admitted. He doesn't really hang out with the old crew much anymore. But I'd love to meet up this week. We met at a quiet downtown restaurant. At first, Tom was polite, but as the conversation deepened, his concern became clear. I'm worried about him, he confessed. He used to be decisive, make plans, stick to them, speak his mind. Now everything has to be cleared with call first, and she always finds a reason to cancel. Guy trips we've planned for years, even his birthday dinner. She said he was too stressed for a party. Even tennis matches have to fit her schedule. Tom leaned closer. And the money stuff is odd. Darren was generous, but never reckless. Now Kaya's always talking about expensive things she wants. Travel, upgrades for the house, constant hints. It matched everything I'd learned about her. She was increasing her financial expectations now that the baby gave her more security. Has Darren mentioned her family? I asked. That's another strange thing. She tells these stories about private schools and European vacations. But when her parents came to the wedding, they seemed, well, like regular folks. Nice, but definitely not wealthy. Tom's observations were his own, unprompted by anything I'd shared. Tom, if Darren ever needs someone to talk to, someone who cares about his well-being, would you be there? Of course. But he's not going to admit to marriage problems. He barely acknowledges they exist and just keep being his friend. And if you ever notice anything that concerns you about his safety or happiness, please call me. Tom studied me. You think he's in trouble? I think he's in a situation he doesn't fully understand yet. When he realizes it, he'll need people who care for the right reasons. My next step was more delicate, giving Darren a chance to see Kaya's true nature without a single fingerprint of mine on the setup. I made a sizable donation to the Children's Hospital where he volunteered and suggested they honor him at their annual gala. The development director was delighted. We'd love to have the whole family there, she told Darren when she called. Your mother mentioned how proud she is of your volunteer work. I knew Kaya would hate it. A public event full of people who knew our family well, where she couldn't control the story. She'd have to attend and risk being questioned or find a way to keep Darren away. She chose the second option. Mom, I'm going to have to skip the hospital gala, Darren said when he called. James has been fussy and Kaya doesn't think she can handle an evening event yet. Of course the baby comes first, I replied, though I knew the real reason. 2 days later, my suspicion was confirmed. Dr. Sarah Chen, James's pediatrician and an old friend, phoned. Leona, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, she said. I wanted to see how you're enjoying grandmotherhood. It's wonderful, though I haven't had much chance to see James yet, I admitted. Sarah hesitated. That's actually why I'm calling. Kaya brought James in yesterday for what she described as an emergency visit. Said he had a fever and trouble breathing, but he was perfectly healthy. Normal temperature, clear lungs, right on track developmentally. And honestly, she seemed almost disappointed when I told her everything was fine. The pattern was undeniable now. Kaya was using the baby's health as a tool for control, another carefully staged excuse to isolate Darren and keep me out. Sarah's warning stayed with me. Can I ask you to keep me informed if there are any genuine health concerns with James? I'd said. As his grandmother, I want to know. Of course, she replied. And Leona, trust your instincts. I've seen enough new parents to recognize when anxiety crosses the line. That night I updated my notes, carefully documenting Kaya's every move. Evidence mattered. If things escalated, I'd need a clear record of her manipulations. And she was slipping, growing careless, overconfident. James Morrison called soon after. She's escalating, he reported. This week she met with 3 different estate attorneys. She's asking detailed questions about challenging mental competency, how to document confusion, what medical proof is required. She's building a case to have me declared incompetent, I said flatly. That's how it looks, James agreed. Be careful and keep everything confidential. The plan was obvious now. Gain legal control of my assets through Darren while I was still alive. But knowing her intent gave me the advantage. It was time to stop defending and start shaping the outcome. 3 weeks after the hospital incident, Darren called on a quiet Tuesday. His voice carried a strain I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. Mom, can I ask you something? It's about Dad's medical records. My heart tightened. Of course, sweetheart. What do you need to know? Kay's been asking a lot about Dad's illness. Whether it was genetic, if there were signs of mental decline, any periods of confusion. Ice slid through my veins. This was exactly what James had warned me about. Your father's mind was sharp until the day he died, I said. His doctors can confirm that. Diabetes affected his body, not his judgment. That's what I thought, Darren said. But Ka seemed to think there might have been confusion toward the end. She says someone mentioned it, but she can't remember who. Sweetheart, I have all of your father's medical records. If Ka truly wants a genetic history for James, I can share the relevant details directly with his pediatrician. That would be great. Dr. Chen mentioned she'd like a complete family history. The next day I called Dr. Chen. Actually, Leona, she told me, I never requested additional records. Kaya offered to compile one, but when I said the basic information was enough, she seemed disappointed. Another lie exposed. Kaya wasn't gathering data for the baby. She was searching for ammunition. Please note in James's file that I'm available if real health concerns arise, I said. I'll make a note of it, Dr. Chen promised. Kaya's fabrications were becoming easier to spot, and Darren was starting to notice the cracks. The next one appeared during what should have been a simple family dinner. My first real chance to meet James. Darren's invitation came with careful limits. Maybe just a short visit, he said. Kay is still protective about his schedule. I arrived with a single gift, a children's book Darren had loved as a boy. Kaya opened the door with James in her arms. For the first time, I saw my grandson up close. Dark hair like Darren's, striking green eyes like hers. He regarded me with that deep, serious gaze babies have when they're memorizing a new face. He's perfect, I said softly, keeping my hands at my sides and letting Kaya set the pace. He's been a little fussy today, she said, though James looked perfectly content. Inside, the house felt different from my last visit. Subtle changes in the furniture, the photos, the energy of the space. I could feel the careful control she'd woven into every corner, and I knew I had to move just as carefully if I wanted the truth to surface on its own. Mom, I'm sorry about tonight, Darren said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. There's nothing to apologize for, I answered softly. You're both adjusting to a new baby. It's a lot. He hesitated. Kaya thinks I embarrassed her. She said I undermined her in front of you when I asked if you could help with James. I could almost hear the tension in the silence that followed. Parenting is hard, I said carefully. Sometimes different ideas clash. That doesn't mean either of you is wrong. She said I made her look like she can't handle things, he admitted. But Mom, James calmed down with you in seconds. I can't remember the last time she looked that upset. I kept my tone even. Every parent has moments when they feel unsure. The fact that you care about giving James the best care, that's what matters. Darren exhaled, the sound of someone carrying too much. I just don't want to fight anymore. I'm tired of feeling like I have to check every decision with her. You're both new at this, I said. But you're James's father. Your voice matters too. There was a long pause. Thanks, Mom. It helps to hear that anytime, sweetheart. Remember, you're not alone. You have people who love you and want the best for you and James. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. After we hung up, I sat in the stillness of my house, the echo of our conversation lingering. Tonight had shifted something. Darren had seen, if only for a moment, that his instincts were valid and that Kaya's need for control wasn't the same as love. I knew this was only the beginning. Kaya would sense the change, and she wouldn't take it lightly. But Darren had taken his first small step toward independence, and for the first time in months, I felt the balance start to move. Kaya's words landed like a cold draft across the table. Your financial situation, she repeated, her voice perfectly calm, as if we were discussing the weather. I set my coffee cup down slowly. That's an interesting topic for lunch, I said evenly. Why the sudden concern? She gave a practiced little shrug. Darren and I just want to be sure everything is stable. We've noticed you've been very generous with gifts, and we wouldn't want you to overextend yourself. The implication was clear. Hint at fragility, plant seeds of doubt, suggest that I might be incapable of managing my own affairs. My finances are in excellent order, I replied, meeting her eyes. You don't need to worry about me. Kaya smiled, cool, deliberate. That's good to hear. Still, it might be wise to simplify things. Sometimes, when people get older, it's helpful to have family involved early. Power of attorney, joint accounts, those sorts of arrangements can prevent confusion later. There it was, the real objective spoken aloud at last. I appreciate your interest, I said, keeping my voice measured, but I have everything arranged with my attorney. There's no confusion to prevent. She held my gaze, searching for any sign of weakness. I just think it's better to plan ahead. Darren feels the same. I let the silence stretch. If Darren has concerns, he's welcome to talk to me directly. About my finances or anything else. For the first time that afternoon, Kaya's confidence wavered. A flicker of irritation crossed her face before she masked it with another polite smile. Of course. I only want what's best for everyone. I returned the smile, just as polite, just as controlled. So do I. Inside, though, I felt a quiet surge of certainty. She'd finally shown her hand, openly, unmistakably, and I was ready. My trusts were already secured, my documentation complete, my allies in place. When we stood to leave, Kaya reached for the check, but I was faster. Lunch is on me, I said. Consider it a small token of my excellent financial health. Her smile tightened. That's generous of you. Generosity runs in the family, I answered lightly. As I walked back to my car, I replayed every word. Kaya thought she'd steered the conversation, but she'd given me exactly what I needed. Undeniable proof of her intentions. The game was no longer about defense. Now, with every safeguard already in motion, all I had to do was wait, and let her next misstep finish what she had started. Darren's voice was steady but heavy. "Mom, sit down," he said, rocking James gently. Kaya sat across the room, her eyes swollen and red. The silence between them felt sharp enough to cut. I lowered myself onto the sofa, keeping my movements calm, deliberate. "All right," I said. "Tell me what's on your mind." Darren looked from me to Kaya. Kay told me everything. About the lunch. About the plans she's been making. Kaya's fingers twisted in her lap, but she didn't speak. "I need to know," Darren continued. "How much of it is true?" I met his eyes. "Everything I showed her today is documented. I didn't want to involve you until I was sure. But the facts are what they are." He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. She admitted she went to those attorneys. She said she just wanted to understand our options. My heart ached for him, even as relief settled in. "I'm sorry you have to hear it this way," I said softly. "But you and James deserve honesty." Kaya finally spoke, her voice cracking. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I thought it was the smart thing to do. Your mom is powerful, Darren. I didn't know how else to feel secure." Darren held her gaze for a long moment. "Secure doesn't mean secret meetings and lies." His words were quiet, but the disappointment in them was unmistakable. "I know," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I went too far." The room fell silent again, except for James's small breaths. I looked at my grandson, so innocent, unaware of the storm swirling around him, and then back at my son. "I love you both," I said. "I will always help where I'm welcome. But I won't let anyone rewrite our family's history or question my ability to care for myself." Darren reached across and squeezed my hand. "I understand now. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Kaya wiped her eyes, unable to meet my gaze. "I need to earn back your trust," she said quietly. "That's between you and Darren," I replied. "I'm here for James. And for my son." No raised voices followed, no dramatic exit, just the heavy truth settling into the room. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift back where it belonged. I sat quietly while Darren began to speak, his voice low but steady. "I've been asking Kaya some questions about things that haven't been making sense," he said. "She told me about your lunch today and about the research you've done. She also admitted to things she's been hiding from me." Kaya's voice was barely a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far." "What exactly went too far?" Darren asked, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard. "The attorneys." "The research into your mother's finances," she said, eyes glistening. "I thought if we could just gain some control over the family money, we could make sure James had the best opportunities. By lying about my father's medical history? By trying to have my mother declared incompetent?" Darren's words cut through the room. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," she murmured. "I just wanted security for our family." "Our family includes my mother," Darren said firmly. "She's James's grandmother. She built everything we have, and you've been working to push her out." He crossed the room, still holding James, and sat beside me. "Mom, I owe you an apology, a huge one. I let my marriage become more important than the people who've always been there for me. I allowed someone to convince me that your love was a problem." Tears blurred my vision. "Darren, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "You've never been anything but supportive. When Dad died, you held us together. When I needed help with school or work, you were always there. and I let someone make me believe that was toxic. He turned to Kaya, who was silently crying. I think we need some time apart. We both have to figure out what we want from this marriage. Darren, please, she whispered. We can work this out. I can change. I don't know if you can, he said quietly, and I don't know if I can trust you to try. Then he looked back at me. Mom, would it be all right if James and I stayed with you for a while, just until I figure out what's next? I looked at my son, the man I'd raised to be strong and kind, and at my grandson, innocent of the conflict around him. You're always welcome in my home, I said softly. Both of you. 3 months later, Darren filed for divorce. Kaya fought at first, but the evidence of her deception was overwhelming. In the end, she accepted a modest support arrangement and limited custody. James took his first steps in my living room while Darren and I cheered. We built new traditions: Sunday morning pancakes, evening walks in the garden, bedtime stories by Charles's old chair. Darren dated occasionally, but carefully. I want to find someone who loves us both, he told me one night as James stacked blocks. Someone who sees you as part of our family, not a threat to push away. For the first time in years, I felt fully myself again. The woman who built a thriving hospital, raised a good man, and protected her family when it truly mattered. On James's first birthday, a card arrived from Kaya. Inside, she'd written, I hope someday you'll understand that I only wanted what was best for my family. I dropped it straight into the trash. Some lies don't deserve a second life. One quiet October afternoon, James looked up at me and said, Nana, for the first time. It was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. In his bright green eyes, I saw not just love, but the certainty that he would grow up surrounded by people who genuinely cherished him. That was worth every battle. And now I'm curious, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Have you faced something like this yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. While you're here, check out the other stories linked on the screen. They're some of the channel's favorites and full of surprises. Thank you for staying with me to the end.